Any person involved in conservation becomes heavily emotionally involved. I guess it's like anything really. You give a large part of your life to it, and your waking hours, as much of your brain and your heart as you can spare. Otherwise, these sort of things just wouldn't happen. It depends on people being devoted.
Ooh.
So this is where you release them?
This will be one of the sites we've chosen to release the eastern quoll. It's far away from any sort of human disturbance. It's also a long way from the entrance to the park where most foxes are likely to be. It also is, strange as it may seem, these sort of coastal scrubby areas is one of the last places quolls were recorded from in Australia. An American zoologist studying Australian animals in 1919, the only place he could find eastern quolls was in the Banksia scrub and sea cliffs behind Coogee. Obviously, they're not going to be there now. They used to be one of the most common animals in southeastern Australia. In fact, they used to reach plague abundance. People would kill hundreds of animals in one night. They were that common, but have since disappeared entirely from the mainland, with the last ones being recorded specimen being one from Sydney, from Vaucluse in 1963. They've been released behind fences in places near Canberra and where they're doing quite well. But here we're wanting them to actually, if you like, coexist with a very low density of foxes. That's really the only hope of bringing back so many of our native fauna.
Well, in here we're going to have a look at, we've got a single-sex group of 5 two-year-old male eastern quolls. So we'll go in there and check these guys out, Barbara. A translocation of any species is quite an exciting thing, and we know in Australia extinction for a large number of species has occurred over a long period of time. So to be able to reintroduce a species back into its former home range is something I think it's very important. It might be the first step in a number of species or a number of different sites for eastern quolls. So it's exciting for us to be involved with it. They're a very curious but nervous animal. Incredibly fast, they can move incredibly fast when they need to. They're good climbers. They forage. They'll eat a range of different things, from insects through to reptiles, through to small mammals, birds, things like this. We've had a great breeding season, Rob.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we had 5 recommended pairings and all of those have been successful. I think we've got 24 to 25 pouch young, which is great, and a fairly even sex ratio as well.
In Australia, rewilding is really about reversing the downward trajectory for a lot of our critical weight range mammal species. They've suffered under the hands of foxes and cats really heavily, and we have to work on strategies to bring these guys back in the face of these threats.
Is it fair to just blame the cats and the foxes, or are humans not partly to blame?
Yeah, well, humans brought the cats and the foxes here. Look, in Australia, the primary threat to these animals has really come from foxes and cats. So in Europe, much of it's come from hunting and habitat loss over thousands of years. But in Australia, we still have, even though we're losing habitat, we've still got some fantastic habitat for these animals to live in. But the pests in these ecosystems are just not letting them come back.
Would it really matter if the eastern quoll didn't come back?
Look, it's a species that Australians have lived with and interacted with for 50,000 years. We're the first generation to live without the experience of having eastern quolls in our environment, and we're worse off for not having it around. It's one of Australia's most beautiful animals. It performs a real significant role in our ecosystems. So yeah, we've absolutely got to try and bring it back. Farmers used to love them. They used to call them the farmer's friend. They eat pasture grubs, they eat pests, mice, rats. They're a really fantastic animal to have around.
Well, Barbara, what we have here is one of the main tools in biodiversity conservation in Australia, and that is a buried 1080 bait for controlling introduced red foxes. So we bait this park probably more intensively than just about anywhere in Australia, and we've had some wonderful results from this. It's meant this control of foxes has meant that species like long-nosed bandicoots, eastern bristlebirds and hooded plovers have all increased in abundance at Buddery. So we're very pleased with these results. And it's also the main reason why we think we'll be able to reintroduce the eastern quoll.
Do you ever feel sorry for the fox?
Yeah, they're a lovely animal, they're a beautiful animal. And they're no right or wrong, good or bad animals. They're just animals in places we don't want them to be.
Even though the park has had a very long-term fox management plan, and they've got foxes down to essentially undetectable levels, there are foxes in the landscape outside the park. It's a large-scale program. To drive to each of our camera stations, that would be about 250 kilometres, and the park itself down here, it's about 7,000 hectares of landscape in this area, and we're focused on the 14,000 hectares of landscape outside the park. So it's a significant chunk of the east coast.
So in an ideal world, you'd clear that whole area of fox and feral cats?
Look, we're not going to live without foxes in the landscape. What we want to demonstrate is that we can manage foxes to a level that allows eastern quolls to persist in that landscape.
In a community sense is a big thing, and not only that, just seeing these animals, you know, in your hands, you know what I mean, when you release them, and it's a overwhelming experience of just meeting new species and just one of them things that you can't wait for it to happen, I suppose.
Do you think it's going to work?
I reckon if we control the foxes, we got a 90% chance.
We've suffered in the past from people moving animals around the countryside willy-nilly, so it has to be something that's done very thoroughly considered and well-resourced and well-researched. Parks Australia is well aware that this reintroduction and other reintroductions being undertaken in different parts of their estate may fail. We learn a lot from the failures, and translocation is a high risk, high return game.